starting our meeting with harmonious sound.
Thank you for having me.
We're really delighted to see the turnout tonight. There may be some who were kept away from this meeting, some who felt afraid because they heard there were going to be demonstrations outside. Some may have been kept away by some people's attempts to discredit the task force and to discredit Bill Wassmuth. I want you each to congratulate yourself and turn to your neighbor and congratulate them, because by coming here tonight, you have dealt a blow to the greatest enemies of human rights, hate and fear. They haven't kept you. You all see this picture? This is an enlargement of a cartoon that was in the Spokesman Review a few weeks ago. And it's a good symbol of why we're here, why the task force is here, and why you are all here tonight. We need to counteract the image of our beautiful area as a place where hate and bigotry can flourish. For until we change that image, it will perpetuate itself. Your presence here tonight is proof that this is not deserved. And let this meeting be the beginning of changing the face of North Idaho. We're all anxious to hear Bill speak, but before he does, we have some representatives of our community here who will each want to say a few words about why it's important to stand up for human rights and to honor the dignity and worth of each human being. They are going to speak, and after Bill's talk, there will be an opportunity for some questions and answers. There are cards on each of your chairs that are set up so that if you want to ask a question of Bill, you can write your question on the card. There's also a place for you to sign if you'd like more information about becoming a part of the task force. There are two folds. Someone will collect the cards close to the conclusion of this talk, and that way hopefully we can have representative questions answered. First of all, I'd like to introduce Lorraine Bowman. Lorraine is a businesswoman that has been in Sandpoint for many years and is presently the head of the Idaho Tourist Council. She's going to talk to us. Lorraine?
Thank you. It's nice to see so many familiar faces out there. I've missed all of you. Most of you I have poured a cup of coffee at one time or another. And I really, really miss you. I've probably poured a cup of coffee for those fellows out front as well. And let me tell you, besides being ugly, they're lousy tippers. I was born in Idaho, and so I take particular offense with any criticism that is leveled against Idaho or its people and its beautiful land. I take particular offense to the New York Times article that ran this last year. I no longer consider it the New York Times, I consider it the New York Empire. That's the kind of tabloid that it has become. There's so many positive things to be said that for them to reach into vermin, it's irresponsible in my opinion. I'd like to talk to you about my family. 4 children, 8 grandchildren. They all live here in Sandpoint. They all go to school at the same schools. They live within bike riding distance of each other. They're all best friends. My oldest son, Michael, delivers Swan's products, ice cream and other things, to a lot of good people. But I'd like to tell you about when he was in the 1st grade in Lake Oswego, Oregon. A Rainbow family moved into our neighborhood, a black father, federal judge, and a Japanese lady. They had a son who was kindergarten age. Michael came home that first day from school, and his shirt was torn, he was bloody, he was bruised. I said, Mike, what happened? And he said, Mom, you know those big kids, those big 2nd graders? Well, bullies come in every size and shape, I guess, but I was really proud of Michael. I still am. Conrad now, I've kept in touch with him. He is a professor at the University of Minnesota. Great kid. My youngest son, Ryan, when he was in the 3rd grade, right after school started, he came home from school and he says, Mom, would you pack an extra sandwich for my friend Tony? Tony doesn't have a lunch most of the time. So I said, sure, Ryan, no problem. I packed an extra sandwich, piece of fruit, cookie. And that went on for some time until the first open house, and I went to school, and I said to the teacher, is there anything else I can do to help Tony? And she says, well, what did Ryan tell you about Tony? I said, well, he told me that he wore glasses and he had real curly hair. The teacher started laughing, and she said, teacher, he didn't tell you that Tony's black? I said, no. Didn't matter to Ryan, sure didn't matter to me. I was proud of the kid. As many of you know that knew my husband and I before he died, we like to travel to distant places, far away, exotic. We went not so much as tourists, but as polite guests. As a result, in China, Nepal, India, the Amazon, Rio, Mexico, we were invited into the most humble of dwellings. A lot of times we couldn't communicate with our hosts. We could just communicate by smiles, laughs, hugs, and pantomime, and that doesn't seem to matter. It's universal, right? I have a cousin who's gay. He's one of the most beautiful people that I've ever met in my whole complete life. He and his friend have been together for over 40 years. And when my daughter was going to school in Colorado, their home was her home and her friend's home while she was going to school. I never worried about her for a second. My life has been made so much richer by the rainbow of people walking through it that I feel genuinely sorry for anyone that doesn't see the beauty of the rainbow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. And our next speaker will be Travis Hall, who is the Kootenai County Prosecutor.
I'm going to take a different course than what was spoken to you previously. When I attend conferences throughout the United States, attending the Career Prosecutors course in Houston, Texas, or the Child Sexual Abuse course that I attended in Baltimore, Maryland, you get to rub elbows with prosecutors throughout the United States. During the course of our meetings, we always share stories, war stories of prosecution that we have in our own communities. And when people find out I'm from northern Idaho, there's a rhetorical question that comes. And that is that where the Aryans are? There is a strong sense within myself to just want to lash out and say that's not what North Idaho is about. That may be the rap that we receive through national media, but that is not what we have in our communities. Unfortunately, people, though, in our communities are not accepting individual responsibilities to govern themselves. Peace can only come in a community when we learn to govern our own individual selves. Unfortunately, in our society, and what has happened, and I think is certainly the tenor of our political community, is that government is too large. And one of the reasons why government is too large and so pervasive is because we have not governed ourselves. Where families and individuals took care of their fellow being, then the government was never present. When that stopped happening, though, the government felt public pressure through different means and different groups to step in and to assume certain responsibilities. Now we're faced with a situation where people are lashing out against the government. That peace can come, but only if we accept certain responsibilities. Law enforcement is not an evil that we have in society. I don't care what faction or group that you belong to or what your individual thoughts are. There are protections that are needed through our law enforcement community. Law enforcement does not stand for the suppression of ideas. It stands for the stopping of conduct in our communities which are made unlawful by our legislators. Our legislators should be petitioned by individuals that have certain thoughts or ideas of what laws ought to be within our state, and that is not happening. The goal of peace is to use the process that our Constitution, both state and federal, have set up, and that has not happened in the past. In addition to the lobbying of legislators, it also should be important for people to understand both the referendum and initiative process locally and on the state. Again, we are not interested in the suppression of ideas, for people can express themselves in however they want. It's only when the conduct becomes unlawful that law enforcement stands up and enforces the law. With that, though, comes a certain amount of paranoia, because law enforcement, as they are underpaid and they put themselves at risk every day as they're out on patrol or they're investigating crimes, they are seeing a rise of individuals who are carrying weapons. And certainly, law enforcement does not take the position that people should not have the right to bear arms. But what is becoming more alarming is the concealed weapons that law enforcement know nothing about. We are finding officers within the state of Idaho being shot by individuals on routine traffic stops, and they are not aware of any type of weapons. We are seeing people hurt and maimed because in their opportunities to resolve disputes, they take to violence. And it's unfortunate that we have got to that level in our community. However, there is a way that each of us here tonight and those that we can affect those in our community. And that's by accepting individual responsibilities and making sure that we send a message of peace and tolerance to all people that we meet, not only in this community, but throughout the nation in your own travels. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Our next speaker is Tom Rank, who is the president of the Bonner County Realtors Association.
Thank you. Actually, I'm the immediate past president, but I guess I can still speak a little bit for our association. I'm pleased to be here tonight as a representative of the Realtors because I'm proud of the way our profession has responded to the need for fair treatment of all people. Since the Realtors have one of the largest business organizations in the country, our actions affect many people. 20 years ago, in 1975, the National Association of Realtors and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development executed the original affirmative marketing agreement, the first nationwide agreement under the Fair Housing section of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. This bans all discrimination in the sale, rental, or financing of residential dwellings. The Bonner County Association of Realtors has nearly 180 members who have pledged to uphold the Realtors Code of Ethics, which states in part, Realtors shall not deny equal professional service, nor shall they be party to any plan or agreement to discriminate against a person or persons on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, or national origin. Many members of our local association of realtors also subscribe to the Voluntary Affirmative Marketing Agreement, or VAMA. This is an effective way for us to implement our commitment to equal opportunity housing. The National Association believes that volunteer efforts to resolve the ongoing problems of housing discrimination will genuinely lead to the way toward more meaningful, harmonious, and lasting programs than could ever be achieved through the force of government action. Therefore, we as realtors make a public commitment to participate in community efforts to eliminate barriers to equal opportunity in housing. So what does this mean in real life situations? Well, for example, if someone approaches a realtor and says, I want to buy a home in this area, but I don't want to be near any blacks or Hispanics or Jewish families, we're obliged to tell them that we cannot and will not do business that way. It's discriminatory and illegal. This principle also applies to the actions of realtors. For example, we cannot make any illusions that a neighborhood will be difficult to sell because of the presence or the absence of persons of a particular minority or religion. Sellers as well have obligations under the law. If a seller tells me that he will pay a bonus for selling his home to the right people, alluding to, say, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, I must tell him that it would be both unethical and illegal for me to accept the listing with any conditions on the race or religion of the buyer. Such actions would subject both of us to very serious liability, and besides, it's just plain unfair. Personally, I've always tried to be honest and fair in the way I conduct my business, as well as my personal life, and I expect others to act in the same way. Race and religion do not determine how I deal with others. Bigotry, hatred, harassment, and acts of violence have no productive place in any community. I believe in the free exchange of ideas, even those that may be unpopular, however. Free speech, after all, is one of the cornerstones of our society. But this does not mean we have to accept ideas which we do not agree with. It is incumbent upon all of us to stand up for what we believe, to speak out against hatred and bigotry, and to speak up for peace, love, understanding, and a little human happiness. I share the concern with realtors and other citizens of Bonner County that our community does not become a haven for racist and violent hate groups, as much of the media seems to be inclined these days. Instead, I urge us all to show the world that we are the positive, open, beautiful, and diverse community that we truly are. Thank you.
Now we hear from Mary Robinson Moore, who has for the last 11 years been the pastor of the First Presbyterian Church.
I am sending you out like sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Those words are included in the instructions given by Jesus to his 12 disciples as they're sent out to do his work. It's an instruction which the religious community would do well to remember today. I offer it to you as a guide for the time, place, and situation which brings you here tonight. I want us to consider for a moment how we are needed to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves in regards to the Patriot movement, white supremacy, the Christian identity movement, and other similar trends that are taking root in our area.
Well, first of all, why do we have to be wise as serpents? Well, quite simply, it's a time when discernment is needed. The supremacist movements try to actively recruit new members in a variety of ways. And one of the strategies they use involves discussion around a topic of controversy, one in which the listener is drawn in by a common concern. Gun control and taxes and homosexuality are a few examples of topics that have been used. There's almost always some kind of a kernel of what you might call truth, something that any rational person might support that's included in the argument, but kind of like a lure on a fishhook. For persons who find the Judeo-Christian scriptures to be authoritative, scripture is often used as that lure, used in an attempt to gain legitimacy or support for a supremacist point of view. And so those who are wise as serpents need to discern when to not be taken in. Just because someone salts an argument with a series of scriptures, which are probably pulled out of their context, that doesn't mean they're using or even understanding those scriptures appropriately. After all, Matthew's gospel narrates the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness and relates that even Satan quotes scripture to Jesus while arguing with him. At this point, I have to register one of my concerns for the religious community in Sandpoint in North Idaho. Because in the age of the information superhighway, at a time in which biblical studies have also ventured into new, exciting horizons, the extent of biblical illiteracy seems to grow. Many who hold the Bible to be authoritative do not familiarize themselves with its contents or its various interpretations. Somebody I spoke to the other day had no idea who Moses might be. And another person who I would perceive to be well-educated quoted a Chinese proverb and said that it was in the Bible somewhere. Well, to my church-going friends, I say you've got to become more knowledgeable about the scriptures, about the overall themes and messages of the Bible. For in order to be wise as serpents, when confronted with arguments supposedly based on scriptures, you need as much background as you can get. But even if you don't know every jot and tittle of the Bible, you can still know the essence of the good news, the very core of the gospel. Use that as your measure for discernment. When Jesus was asked to summarize the law, how did he answer? You know, he answered with a two-pronged answer. First of all, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And then when that questioner wanted to weasel out of the limitless definition of neighbor, Jesus continued with what? That famous parable of the Good Samaritan, shocking all of the racial purists of his day, because the hero of the parable was a half-breed, a despised Samaritan, viewed by the good stock as racially impure. And you know, Jesus wasn't really into establishing commandments, per se. That wasn't quite his style. But in the Gospel of John, he does lay down one commandment. And he says, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. And so, friends, it doesn't take a biblical genius to begin to see the shape of what was most important to Jesus. So what does the central message of God's love demonstrated in Christ have to do with a rhetoric of hate, of anger, of shoving certain groups of people aside? Not a lot. Not anything, really. It tells us that our healing, our salvation, our restoration have to do with grace, not race. With the love and mercy of God, not the brand of flesh with which we were born. Grace, not race, is at the core of the gospel. So be discerning when someone offers an argument peppered with scriptures. Let's
It's also important that we remain innocent as doves. You know what that means? It means we can't respond to the rhetoric of hate with another rhetoric of hate, no matter how tempting that is. You see, many who are drawn to separatist movements have found that they don't fit into society anywhere else. They may have felt like misfits throughout school, or they may very well have felt burned by the system. They may have been left out of the job market or the great American dream. They may very well carry a great deal of pain, and they may know no other way to cope with it except by lashing out in anger and hatred. And at some point, such persons need compassion. Our task, then, is not to respond by vilifying them, but by finding a third response. And what's that? Quite honestly, we don't have a lot of models for it in this world. It's somewhere between two extremes. One which resists hatred to the point of adopting a new form of hatred, and the other extreme which becomes kind of a patsy offering a cheap type of compassion that doesn't have any power to confront evil. And neither one of those extremes is acceptable as a response. The stance in the middle is one which will stand firmly for integrity, for the truth that will set all of us free. This is not the time for the religious community to be passively compliant with supremacy by its silence and non-action. We do need to take a stand. Spiritual resources are needed to help our broader community find the middle road until that middle road becomes more familiar. It's not going to be an easy road, but it's the necessary road for this time and this place. And I do believe it will be revealed to us as we struggle together to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Thank you.
Now I'd like to introduce to you Buzz Irons, whom probably most of you know. One of the founders of our task force, who will introduce our main speaker, Bill Wassmuth.
It really is a pleasure to introduce Bill. We go back a number of years now in a variety of kinds of relationships. But I can tell you this, that you have the privilege to listen tonight to one of the men, probably the most significant and most tireless worker for human rights that our country has seen. His constant efforts astound me, the kind of time that he puts in. His day for the last 3 or 4 days started early in the morning, got up before I did when he left. He comes back late at night. He didn't have time to relax until we brought him here. He had to find a place to hide just to be quiet for about 20 minutes. Bill was one of the founders of the Human Rights Task Force, or the equivalent of our task force in Kootenai County. He's felt firsthand the pain of violence. He's experienced it. He knows what he's talking about. He agonizes sometimes in the necessary kind of responses that we have to have to things. But always he keeps the picture ahead of him that this country needs to know that we will die if we do not learn how to live together. Bill?
us, and thanks to all of you for that warm welcome. Appreciate it very much. My mother says these days frequently, it warms the cockles of my heart to be with you. It is great to be here. It's always great to be in northern Idaho. Even though I live in Seattle these days, northern Idaho is very, very much home for me. And it's great to be here and to spend these days. Tuesday night, we were down in Kootenai meeting with some community folks there to address the threat that comes from Bo Grice and his establishment in Kootenai. Wednesday, meeting with county elected officials and law enforcement all day long in 3 counties in that area, because law enforcement, elected officials these days are frequently the target of various kinds of Christian patriot activities. And last night in Boundary County, and today here in Bonner County. I thank you for being here for a number of reasons. The personal reason and the selfish reason is that your presence and your energy and your commitment energizes me and renews my commitment, renews my energy. And I thank you for that. As I walk away from here tonight, more committed, more anxious to continue the work that needs to be done and to play the small role that I play in it. You all play a role as well. I want to take this opportunity to be sure and express, in the name of all of you perhaps, but for myself for sure, appreciation for your task force here in Bonner County. They have been leaders, they have been tireless in terms of the activities that they have done, whether it's in school or with the community at large, or whether it was with providing such leadership to help this community take such a strong stand against the bigotry that was being promoted by ballot measure 1. I congratulate the Boundary County Task Force, and I congratulate all of you for the work that you did with that and for the work that you've done since we last were in this hall in 1991. And I'll leave you in a round of applause for that Boundary Task Force. We're here tonight to say that strength comes from unity. This is the button from Kootenai, and I thought I'd just leave it on for a little while to help remind us of that truth. We're here to reaffirm our commitments to justice, our commitment to peace, our commitment to equality for all persons, and our commitment to and respect for diversity in our country and in our community. That's our focus tonight. That's what we're about. Certainly there are a lot of problems in our society, there are a lot of problems in our world, there are problems in the way that we are governed, and those need to be addressed. Certainly the structure and the government that's in place is not perfect, and no one would say that it is. And it's important that we be critical, but in a constructive fashion, not a destructive fashion. It's important also that we recognize that by and large, our structure, our society, our government does work. No matter what kind of complaints we have, we still live in one of the lands that enjoys more freedoms than hardly anyone else in the world. We still live in a land where things basically work. There are problems, but let's not remember that it works as well. But our focus tonight is not upon those problems. It's not to deal with, is there too much crime in our city? Yes, there is. It's not to deal with other problems that might be present in our society. Rather, our focus tonight is to say that no matter how we deal with those problems, it may not be in a fashion that violates the laws of justice and violates our sense of fair play. We're here tonight to say that today's problems must be faced by approaches that are inclusive of all people, not by approaches that divide us against each other. We're here to say that problems today must be addressed by approaches that afford everyone access to justice on an equal basis, and that does not provide more rights for one group than another. We're here to say that approaches to today's problems must be based on a belief in the equality of all people as expressed in our Constitution, and the individual worth and dignity of each person as we all believe because of our faith. We're here to say that approaches must be based on actual factual information, not on stereotypes, not on myths, not on half-truths, not on conspiracy theories, but on facts and on truth. That's what we're about. That's why we're here. Everyone deserves opportunity, in our country unless they give away that right because they violate the rights of others. As the prosecutor was mentioning, there's absolute need for law and order and authority in society. We all recognize that. We know we're in this community, in this state, in this nation, in this world with a whole lot of other people. There are 5,000 plus in Sandpoint, 15 or 35,000 plus in this county, 1 million plus in this state, 300 million plus in the United States, and close to 6 billion in this world. To protect the rights of all of us, whether in this community or in this state or in this nation or in this world, we need a societal structure. We need international structure and law. We need national structure and law. We need local structure and law. We all know that. That's just common sense. Although some would seem to say these days that it's not. If I live all by myself in a little parcel of land and nobody else is around, we don't need any rules. I don't need any structure. I can handle that all alone. But as you full well know, as soon as you put two people in the same house together, you start needing some rules. I lived as a single person for 48 years. I learned that lesson pretty quickly a couple of years ago. It was a delightful lesson, by the way, but it was a lesson nonetheless. As soon as you put one or two or more people into the same room, into the same vicinity, we need rules, we need laws, because each of those persons has rights. And in the exercise of my right, I have to now be conscious of the fact of your rights. To put it in a very visual kind of way, I have a right to form my hand into a fist. I have a right to swing my fist in a circle like this if I want to, as long as you're not standing here. But as soon as you're standing here, you have a right to not have your face be hit. And that modifies my right to swing this fist. It's perfectly clear. It's perfectly simple. When we start talking about 5,000 people in a community, 35,000 people in a county, a million plus in a state, 300 million plus in a nation, and almost 6 billion in a world, it becomes pretty obvious that if we're to respect each other, that's only going to be done with some structure and some law. Otherwise, rights are going to be violated. How society is ordered, that's fluid, and that's debatable, and that's changeable. But that it must be ordered, that is not. Anything less is chaos and is bound to be the violation of the rights and justice of some. To drop out of society for a while if you want, go along for the ride for a while if you want. Perhaps all of us have done that for some period in our lives. But that's different from some in our society today who want to not only pull out of ordered society, but in a revolutionary kind of fashion overthrow it. And they not only want to set up their own rules on how to govern things, but they want to force those rules on the whole of society by threats, by intimidation, and at the point of a gun, and that's simply not acceptable. Sometimes we must call the revolt against government and the revolt against what's termed the New World Order for what it really is. It's mobilizing against society and against the kind of society in which everyone has equal justice. It's mobilizing so that it's mobilizing against a form of justice that balances equality and rights for each other. If we believe in a society where everyone has access to justice, everyone has access to equality, if we believe in lawful resolution, not vigilante violence, then we have a chance of proceeding with some peacefulness. There are ideologies today that are being promoted that are contrary to justice and equality for everyone. And I want to identify some of them tonight. I want to talk first about Christian identity theology. Not to be confused with fundamental Christian theology, because in that case, the order, the core is values and culture. But Christian identity theology, which centers things around race. Christian identity theology says that the lost tribes of Israel in Old Testament times moved their way around the Mediterranean, weren't really lost, went up into the northern European countries and became the ancestors of the Aryans of northern European countries. So the descendants of the tribe of Dan, for example, are the people of Denmark and so on. They believe, therefore, that those folks are the true Israelites. or because I'm German in ancestry, we folks are the true Israelites. And that the true Israelites inherit the promises of Scripture. And that the United States is the promised land for these true Israelites, and that therefore in this country they, as the true Israelites, have more rights than any other. And so when they talk about taking this land back and taking it into their God-given right and making it their homeland, they're doing what they full well believe God has commanded them to do. They believe that Jewish people are equatable with evil, and that in some cases Jewish people are the descendants literally of a mating between Eve and Satan, literally. They believe that people of color are subhuman, not from the pure seed line of Adam, that was the seed line of human beings. That's Christian identity theology in a nutshell. It's the theology of racism. It's the theology of white supremacy. It is impossible to be a believer in Christian identity theology and not be a racist and not be a supremacist. By definition, with the theology, a person who believes that theology believes that one group of people is superior to all others. That doesn't mean that people who hold on to that theory hate others in an emotional sense necessarily. They simply put some in a privileged position and others in oppression. Some have more rights than others in this country simply because of groups to which they belong. And if we remember, that same sort of thing was true in our history books when we studied about slavery. Not all of the slave owners hated their slaves. In fact, many would say that they loved them. Many were kind to them in many kinds of ways. They were good to them. They were kind to them. They took care of them in many kinds of ways. They didn't hate them. They simply oppressed them. They simply kept them in slavery, in servitude. So when someone says, I'm not a racist, I have a friend who is black, it doesn't mean that that person necessarily is not a racist. It's the oppression that matters, not likes or dislikes or an emotion of hatred. It's the systematic oppression of a group. That's what racism and bigotry is about. That's what's wrong, that's what's immoral, and that's what's unconstitutional in the United States of America. And so when Christian identity theology promotes the superiority of one race over another, we have to call it for what it is, racist and supremacist. Now, I don't mean to imply that all people who believe Christian identity theology have horns. Not at all. They can be friendly. They can be neighborly. The goal here tonight, and the goal with our effort to pursue justice, is not to demonize anyone, as was said so well a little bit earlier. We can't cure hate by hating. We can't guarantee the rights of some by taking away the rights of others. The goal is not to demonize anyone. The goal is to identify ideas, identify ideologies, identify approaches, identify methods, identify activities that are unjust, and stand together strong against those forces of injustice. Let me talk a little bit about Christian Patriot, the Christian Patriot movement. And those are terms and titles that I wish we did not have to assign there, because many people are patriots. I consider myself a patriot in our land. Many people are Christian as well. I consider myself that. But they have assumed the title of Christian Patriot as a name for their movement, and so we use the same term. And generally, Christian patriotism is an umbrella term that's used to cover those individuals and groups who somehow believe that the government of the United States as it is today is in violation of the Constitution to one degree or another. Now, it's important to remember that it's the Constitution as the Christian patriots perceive the Constitution to be, and that's a variation. That is not the Constitution with all of the amendments as interpreted by the courts over 200 years of history. The Constitution is not an influid document. It's a document that's been changed by amendments, and it's a document that has been interpreted by court decisions. When the Christian patriots say they're only defending the Constitution, we have to ask them what Constitution? And they'll refer to the organic Constitution. That means the Constitution as they believe that the Founding Fathers intended the Constitution to be written and to be interpreted, not the Constitution as it is interpreted today. And not necessarily with all the amendments either. Some would drop any class to 10. Some would drop amendments that have to do with income tax. Some would drop amendments that have to do with voting rights, etc., for people of color and for women. Christian Patriot movement is a movement. It has a vision of society that it's working to promote. It's a society where white Christian men live in a republic as free men, free from government rule and regulation. And they come at that from many different sides. Some come at it from tax protest positions, and I certainly don't mean to imply that everybody who dislikes paying taxes is in this group. I think most of us would qualify into that kind of category. But tax protest in a sense that they believe that since the government is in violation of the Constitution, therefore it's an illegitimate government, therefore it has no right to collect taxes, therefore not only does a Christian patriot have a responsibility not to pay taxes, but it has a responsibility to try to make sure the taxes aren't even collected, to bog down the government so that it doesn't even function. Red Becklin in Montana is an example of that. Refused to pay taxes for years and years and years. Led to an altercation, a confrontation this year ago, January, when the property that had been sold for tax payment 10 years earlier was now being possessed. And he was asked to leave, and he refused to leave. And many Christian patriots from around the Northwest came and stood by him, daring law enforcement to evict Red Becklin for what was a perfectly legal court order for taking his property for failure to pay taxes over a large number of years. He was not contributing to the functioning of society by paying taxes at that time. Other tax protesters as well. Some come at this Christian patriot notion from the perspective of sovereignty. They file sovereignty claims with courts. In Idaho County, over 50 have been filed since the beginning of the year. They basically resign from the United States. They turn in their social security number, they turn in their driver's license, turn in anything that has anything to do with the United States government and say, I resign. I'm not a U.S. citizen anymore. I am a sovereign individual. That's to set the stage, to pick and choose which ones of federal laws and regulations and what part of that society that we all share they want to be a part of. Taxes, etc. Some come at it from the Posse Comitatus angle. Posse was stronger in the Midwest in the 80s, in the Farm Belt, when the Farm Belt crisis was going on. Posse Comitatus basically believed that the only structure that's really necessary in our society is the sheriff and his posse. And in that case, gender specific can be on purpose. But that's the structure. That's lawmaker, legislator, that's judge, jury, decision, and executioner as well. We don't need any other structure according to them. The sheriff and the county is the ultimate level. Some come at it from land use directions and from property rights side. And again, not everybody who is concerned about property rights in our country, not everybody who is concerned about federal ownership of land fits into the Christian patriot mold, but some do. And Christian patriots are using these issues as ways of bringing other folks into their movement and into their agenda. A movement that's not concerned just about property rights, that's not just concerned about sovereignty, but is concerned about creating a kind of society where one group of people has more rights than others. They come at this from many different sides, Christian patriots do, but the goal is the same. The goal is a movement toward a society that does not guarantee equality for people, and a society often as well that is undemocratic. If you're interested in learning more about these movements, I would point you in the direction of a book that's on the shelf back there called The Northwest Imperative, Documenting a Decade of Hate. In those 140 pages, you'll find very well researched and very well documented information about the Christian identity movement, the neo-Nazi movement, and the Christian patriot movement in our country. And I think accurate information is important for two reasons. It keeps us from sticking our head in the sand and saying none of this is going on. It is going on. On the other hand, it keeps us from panicking as well and building it into much more than what it really is. Accurate information in terms of this movement is crucial and is most important. So you might want to look at that document and see if there's a place that you can have it somewhere here where you can have access to it. In January, the Northwest Coalition convened a meeting of people from around the country because we were hearing from more and more folks concerned over unorganized militias that were springing up all over the country. And we had some information, and other groups had other information, but nobody had, it seems, the whole packet of information. So we drew together 25 people from around the country and used the clock for 2 days of sharing of information. There's a summary sheet on the table in the back there, a goldenrod colored one, that gives you a summary of what that meeting was about and what conclusions we came to. But one of the conclusions that we came to was that it was very likely that there would be violence coming out of the Christian Patriot movement and its militia arms sometime during this coming year. None of us had any expectation of violence, the magnitude and tragedy of Oklahoma City, to the extent that those who are being charged with that crime now have associations with militias. But that there was violence was no surprise. We had been listening to the rhetoric. We had been looking at the ideology. We had been seeing incidents of confrontation happen around the Northwest. And it seemed only a short matter of time before someone stepped across the line, someone got an itchy trigger finger, and violence erupted. And we're not done with this yet by any means. Because for some who believe in the conspiracy theories, what happened in Oklahoma City is simply a validation of their conspiracy theory. All the way from, it was retaliation from the Japanese for the United States putting gas in the subway tunnels in Japan, to it was the government that did it themselves so that we would have legitimate reason, that the government of the United States would have legitimate reason to clamp down on the Patriots. Once you believe a certain level of conspiracy theory, then everything else fits. Oklahoma City is turning some people away from militia movement as a way of addressing problems in our country, but unfortunately it's simply galvanizing some others into a more radical perception of their conspiracy theories than they had in the first place. So we're not past this by any means. What happened as an aftermath of Oklahoma City is that many people focused attention on Christian Patriot movements and on the militia version of it. Particularly, you've seen news accounts, you've seen magazine accounts, you've seen them all over. Some of greater accuracy and more merit than others. But at least attention has been called to the issue and eyes have been opened. It was a wake-up call for us to look at what was really happening. Not somehow to result in suppression of rights, not somehow to squelch the voices that are speaking things that are dissident voices, not to squelch those voices, but that the rest of us know what those voices are about, and that the rest of us know what those agendas are, yes, most certainly. I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking briefly about some of the organizations in the Northwest, and particularly in this area, that promote this Christian identity, Christian patriot stuff that we've just been talking about. And perhaps the most well-known in this area is the Aryan Nations. Besides having neo-Nazi kinds of beliefs, which was especially manifested this past summer when they teamed up with a group whose initials are NSDAPAO. The reason I'm going to use their initials is because that's the front initials for a long-sounding German name, and I'd never be able to say the German name. But essentially, the German name is the Nazi Party. AO is Overseas Operations. NSDAPAO comes from Lincoln, Nebraska, with Gerhard Lapp, who was recently arrested in Holland and extradited, I should say, to Germany for illegal distribution of banned neo-Nazi propaganda. He's the leader out of Lincoln, Nebraska. He teamed up with the Aryan Nations last July, a solid manifestation of the Aryan Nations' commitment to neo-Nazi beliefs. You saw some of that here in Sandpoint. When there was some distribution of literature, it was the NSDAP's newsletter that was distributed with an Aryan Nation flyer in the middle. That's that combination that I'm just referring to now. The Aryan Nations is strong on Holocaust denial, saying it didn't happen. It's a construct of the Jewish media and the Jewish conspiracy internationally. Aryan Nations, Richard Butler is a preacher of Christian identity theology, and as I mentioned before, you can't be a Christian identity believer without being a racist. Aryan Nations has a history of violence. I don't need to go through all that in detail with you. Order 1 in 83 and 84 that killed Alan Berg, murdered another person, robbed banks and armed cars down the coast, and bombed a synagogue in Boise. Some 40 different crimes that they were charged with and convicted of in December of 1985. Order 2 that was convicted of the bombing of my house and several other buildings in downtown Coeur, also convicted of counterfeiting in 1986. Bud Cutler, who was jailed for hiring a hit on one of the men in the order in 1984 or 85, I believe. In 1989, 3 people who came over to Seattle intent on blowing up some buildings and were only stopped because of an informant. and just about a year and a half ago, a murder that took place amongst some folks that were part of the compound of the Aryan Nations. It's an ongoing history of violence. It's a continuing violence that happens from there. And there's continuing activity from the Aryan Nation compound. And the movement was declining in the 80s and early 90s, and some thought after some of the leadership scattered to different parts of the West that the Aryan Nations would gradually fall apart. But it's been experiencing something of a revival in recent months, last year or so. It now has been making a stronger outreach to young people, primarily through racist punk rock and music. And it's also been organizing around the country in different states again, now with somebody present in at least 21 states. In some cases that's only one person, but in other cases there's a group of people involved with it. Aryan Nations is still very much something that we need to be watchful of and concerned about, not just because of their racist beliefs and their Christian identity theology, but because of their track record of violence that shows no kinds of signs of diminishing. Another Christian identity group closer to home here for you, America's Promise Ministries, the outreach arm for Lord's Covenant Church. It's Christian identity theology, it's anti-Jewish, it's racist. And besides that, when you start looking at some of the persons who have been involved in some of the America's Promise Ministry conferences, let me just give you the names of a few. 1991, Estes Mullins, who is an anti-Semitic and has been known as an anti-Semitic person around the country for a long time. Eustace Mullins was also at a conference in early April in Post Falls that was convened by another group that we'll get to in a minute. John Weaver, an identity preacher from Georgia, who preached at that particular conference on the Jewish conspiracy and preached at a later conference on the fact that he believed that people of color were completely without souls. Richard Kelly Hoskins, who advocates the death penalty for homosexuals and for anyone who charges interest on a loan. I'm assuming those people who are laughing are the ones who have loans. Who charge some interest. He also talked and preached at that one about the Bible forbidding interracial marriages and business deals or eating with Jewish people or people of color entirely. At that meeting, at that conference, was Richard Butler, Charles Tate, Bill Rhodes, the Aryan Nations very much present there. In 1994, one of the speakers at that conference held by America's Promise Ministries was Louis Beam. Farley praised Beam as a Christian warrior whom he would like to emulate. Mark Reynolds from Colville of Judas Praise Ministries, who was the host of a radio show over in that part of Washington State, was there as a musical performer at that event as well. Dave Barley also promoted Bo Gritz, the Populist Party candidate for president in 1992. Bo Gritz, while he claims that he's not a racist, we have to continually hold up to him that A, he's a part of the Patriot movement, and the Patriot movement, as I've already outlined, promotes an agenda of different rights for some folks than others. And secondly, the Populist Party in many parts of the country is controlled by members of the racist supremacist movement. The Populist Party in Washington State, and he was on the Populist Party ticket, is headed up by Harry Schmidt, who goes to the Aryan Nation compound all the time, who is an old Klans person, and who is an active racist in the Seattle area. The Sergeant at Arms is Kim Bedinsky, who is the Grand Knight of the Ku Klux Klan out of Tacoma. The Populist Party has very clear kinds of ties. Mr. Barley promoted Bo Gritz's campaign during 1992. America's Promise Ministry, Christian identity here. And part of why you're here tonight is because of concern that was surfaced when it was discovered that Louis Beam and Paul Hall Sr. had bought property just a few miles out of Sandpoint. Louis Beam has a long history, and you have that information sheet in front of you, so I'm not going to go through the details there. A long history of Klan leadership, of involvement with the Aryan Nations, of violence in relation to anti-Vietnamese fishing boat incidents in the Gulf of Mexico. Louis Beam is a Christian identity believer. He has been a speaker at Pete Peters' gatherings in Colorado. Pete Peters is the premier Christian identity preacher in the country. He's been a speaker at America's Promise Ministries conferences here in Sandpoint. He's been present repeatedly at Aryan Nations. He's a writer for Jubilee, Paul Hall's magazine, which is the Jubilee magazine, the Christian identity magazine for the country. Mr. Beam's presence is of great concern for a number of reasons. Not just because of his racist beliefs, but because he's acted on those racist beliefs in his past. He's acted out on those. He's of concern because he promotes a thing called leaderless resistance, which means that small groups of people function with these kinds of ideas, and in his methodology and his ideology function to directly overthrow the government, function in small cells so that they can't be infiltrated, so they can't be stopped, and if one group or one cell is, as a matter of fact, arrested for criminal behavior, that the rest of the cells can continue to function. Mr. Beam is a concern also because he is a networker. He shows up at a lot of different places, with the militia of Montana, with the Aryan Nations, with Christian identity groups, various Christian identity groups, and with various Christian patriot groups. He's a puller together. He's a uniter of those kinds of groups. Some of the patriot groups in this area. Idaho Citizens Awareness Network. At first glance, its mission statement looks innocent enough. But if you examine it closer, you understand its connections to various groups, some of whom I've already identified. Co-chair of ICANN is Dave Farley, again from America's Promise Ministries. John Trockman from the militia of Montana has been an invited speaker to ICANN. The group is very firmly entrenched in the Christian Patriot movement. Idaho Liberty Network and Northwest Liberty Network have held meetings in Coeur d'Alene and in Post Falls and other places that have hosted people like Red Beckton and Eustace Mullins, Christian Patriot folks from Montana, and Eustace Mullins, anti-Semitic from across the country, and again have also hosted John Trockman. Concerned Citizens of Idaho in July of 1994 hosted a meeting also that had John Trockman with the militia of Montana there. Innocent enough sounding names: Idaho Citizens Awareness Network, the Liberty Lobby, Concerned Citizens. Innocent enough sounding names, but part of the Christian Patriot movement. That doesn't mean that everybody that goes to one of these meetings shares all of the beliefs. I know that full well. And I know that we shouldn't paint everybody with the same brush. There are variations in here all along the way. But folks who over any kind of period of time continue to participate in groups that are a part of the Christian Patriot movement, even if they are doing so inadvertently without knowledge of the racist and supremacist agenda of those groups, by the fact that they're a part of the movement, they're moving it along the way. If you have concerns about gun control, go to groups that can deal with gun control in manners that don't advocate also injustice for other folks. Don't go to the militias. Don't go to the Christian Patriot movement. Militias, the militia of Montana, for example. As that sheet will show you in the back, when we got looking at ideology and incidents and belief systems for militias, we found woven throughout them old anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and old states' rights theories. Now, certainly there's room for debate whether states have rights or federal government. That balance between the rights of those two governing entities, there's room for debate and discussion on there, no question about that. But when we see these states' rights theories being advocated, it's the same kind of states' rights rhetoric and theories that were used to justify slavery 200 years ago and used to combat the civil rights movement in the South several decades ago. And so it raises some red flags. We also see the militia movement as being a welcome home for many who have ties to or who are directly involved in the racist supremacy movement. That raises concern as well. And John Trockman and the leadership of the militia of Montana is a good example. John Trockman is an identity believer. He's had Aryan connections in the past, but he continues to be an identity believer today and a promoter of identity belief. Esquire magazine just has an article in this much petition that you might want to look at. That is very revealing in terms of the identity stance of the Trockman family. When he talks about defending the Constitution, we have to ask him whose Constitution, as I outlined a little bit earlier. Is it the Constitution as interpreted by court decisions today with all its amendments, or is the Constitution as they believe the Constitution was intended 200 years ago without the adjustments of those 200 years? We have to identify the racism that's behind that version of the militia and call it for what it is. And I think we have to also, especially in light of what happened in Oklahoma City, but even before that it was pretty obvious, we have to be concerned about the potential for violence from militias. It doesn't take us a long time to figure out that when you have an ideology that promotes paranoia, that's based on misinformation and half-truths, when you have an ideology that promotes stereotypes and conspiracy theories that are based on misinformation, often or exaggeration, when you have an approach that talks in terms of vigilante, take things into your own hands kind of government, in your own hands kind of activity, that sort of vigilante, possibly anarchy. When you have an approach that says, let's deal with our differences through threats and through violence, and ultimately at the point of a gun, if that's what we need to do. When you have a system that talks about distrust of any kind of ordered structure in our society, and in some cases advocates open revolution against that structure in society, against the government, and the militias and the Christian Patriot movement preach all of those things to some degree or another. It doesn't take us a long time to figure out that that kind of ideology creates an environment out of which is going to come violence, out of which is going to erupt violence. It's not surprising. It's happened before, and it'll happen again. That does not mean that we suppress such voices. That's not the solution. It doesn't mean that we push them underground. It means, though, that we need to be aware of what those agendas are and what that ideology might be, lest it take us off guard. A short once over lightly with Christian Patriots, what Christian Patriots are about, what that movement is about, what Christian identity is about. How many are involved in these movements? Who knows? Hardcore members, relatively small number. People who are sort of tiger runners, a larger kind of number. That it's any kind of force that will ultimately be able to take over through any kind of democratic, we outnumber you sort of vote? No, not anywhere close. And that in itself is a concern, because that means as people recognize that that's not going to happen, they turn to other ways to get their way. As is happening in some communities in Montana, that things are not being done anymore in public meetings with open discussion, but because people are so intimidated by some of these factors, they aren't running for elected office, they aren't participating in open meetings. The Forest Service announced just a couple of weeks ago that it's going to avoid flying over certain areas of Montana to spot for fires because they're concerned about the kind of activity of shooting down on the black helicopter theory. It's intruding into the governance of our society, it's intruding into the democratic process. So what I wanted to show you just very briefly tonight is that there is valid reason for concern, there's no valid reason for panic. We're dealing with a movement, we're not dealing with just isolated voices. We're dealing with a movement that has a vision of society that is not acceptable to anyone who believes in justice and equality in the democratic process. We have the opportunity tonight that we have taken by coming here together to stand together to say yes to justice and no to these ideas and injustice. But we have the opportunity every day of our lives to continue saying yes to justice and to continue to say no to those ideas. Again, not by violating the freedoms of everyone. Again, not by painting everyone with some broad, sweet brush. Again, not by stereotyping folks, but by coming to know what the full agendas are, coming to know what the direction is that some of these movements are headed, and to countering that with truth, countering that with fairness, and countering it with justice. To those who hold these ideologies, we stand together tonight to say, no, not you. You can hold those ideas if you want, but don't try implementing them, because we believe in justice. And to those who hold basic theological and philosophical positions that espouse racism and supremacy, we say there really is no basis for discussion as long as your fundamental ideology is racist. Because equality is not debatable, it is not compromisable. Equality is the foundation of our society, it's the foundation of our Constitution, and it's not something that we can debate. So we will meet with you to discuss the problems that face our society anytime, any place, as soon as we know that you're addressing those problems from a position of justice and equality, not from a position of injustice and supremacy. We must, we do, and we will stand against bigotry. Tonight, here in Sandpoint, last night in Boundary County, last Tuesday in Nez Perce, all across this land and this state and this country and this region. We can, we do, we will stand against bigotry. We will stand against supremacy. We will stand against injustice. We will be strong through our unity. We will stand for a society in which every person is respected for who he or she is, regardless of race or religion or sexual orientation, respected for who he or she is. We will stand for... We will stand for a society that recognizes that historically and today as well, the diversity in our land is a source of enrichment and a source of strength and a source of uniqueness in our country that is rich and that is a cause of celebration rather than seeing diversity as in any way a threat. We will stand as a society for equality of opportunity economically, equality of opportunity in terms of justice. We will stand as a society to move in the direction of working against that widening gap between the rich and the poor, which is leading to frustration on so many parts of so many people and leading to acting out into some very bizarre and destructive and harmful ways. We will be concerned about that as a society. We will work in that direction. We will work as a community to find solutions to our problems that are positive and that are constructive, that are as opposed to destructive and ones that tear us apart and divide us. We will, as a community, work to find solutions that are based on peaceful resolution, not the point of a gun, not intimidation, and not violence. We work for a society in which our children can grow up knowing that they are respected as individuals, where our children can grow up knowing the truth, not surrounded by myth and half-truths and conspiracy theories. We will provide a climate where our children can grow up without fear, knowing that justice and law and order will grant them their rights and will protect them from harm from others. That's the kind of society that we're proclaiming that we want by our presence here tonight. That's the kind of society that we work for day by day, each of us in our lives.
One is that while we were setting up tonight, a nurse from the hospital came over and said, some of us can't be here tonight. How can we show that we support what you're doing? They took some bumper stickers, bought some t-shirts, and said what they were going to do was wear white ribbons, because white is a combination of all colors. And they wanted to ask you to join them in wearing white ribbons throughout this weekend. In addition to that, in our effort to increase the visibility of our support for human rights in the community, we do have t-shirts and mugs and bumper stickers over there. Also, we plan to have a float in the 4th of July parade. And we'd like to invite any of you who would like to march with us. We want to carry placards like those that are on the wall back there saying harmony and diversity and justice and equality. anyone who is interested in marching with us, sign up so we have an idea of how many placards we need to make. On the street and in our homes, how do you recommend that we deal with the situation?
I think there's a number of ways that you can respond to that. One of them is be sure that you turn that into someone, either to the Bonner County Task Force or to law enforcement. It's not necessarily a crime to put those things down. In some cases it is. In some cases it's vandalism. In some cases it's other kinds of misdemeanor sorts of crime. But people need to know when that stuff is being distributed. So don't just toss it. Give it to somebody else. That's step one. Secondly, is use it as an opportunity to learn more about the group that's passing it out. Because if they're distributing to you, they're distributing to somebody else. Use it as an opportunity to talk to your kids, to talk to each other about why some of the things in there are wrong. Make it a teachable moment to move toward justice rather than a recruiting movement as it's intended to be. Use it as an opportunity to reach positively rather than negatively. So it should be a manifestation for us as well that we need to provide the kind of climate in our community that those things will not find any welcome hand. So the more we see that kind of stuff, as one voice is raised through those kinds of flyers being passed out, let's raise 10 voices that speak for justice, and then there won't be any room for that to find its roots.
Lots of questions, all the things that you see me setting aside are not questions we don't want to answer. There are people that have handed in their names because they're interested in getting information about joining the task force. If one loves their people and their heritage, does that mean they are haters of others?
Certainly not. Certainly not. We all come from a heritage. We all have a background. We all have a history of family and of ethnic backgrounds. And to be proud of that and to celebrate that is not to be racist at all. To be a racist is to celebrate my ethnicity at the expense of yours. Not to celebrate mine in itself, but to celebrate mine at the expense of yours. To secure my rights at the expense of yours. That's what racism is about. That's what supremacy is about.
Does intolerance of ideas include the right wing as long as they obey the law?
Certainly, and I think I suggested that or said that very clearly. That we don't solve this by suppression. We don't solve it by taking away freedom of people to speak as they want to speak and hold the beliefs that they want to believe. But at the same time that they have the right to hold these kinds of beliefs and to speak what they want to speak, so we too have a responsibility and a right to say what we believe in and to establish the kind of community that we want to live in. And the speech, as was stated very clearly by the prosecuting attorney, when that speech starts transferring over into action that violates the rights of people, then we have a very serious problem where law enforcement can step in. But before law enforcement steps in, there's also the matter that this kind of speech creates a climate that is not fair to the people who are targets of that kind of supremacy and racism. And so the rest of us have a responsibility to stand together strong so that the people who are targets of that kind of racism don't feel that brunt, that don't feel that rage, don't feel that isolation, that they'll know that the 99% of the community here stands with them in the face of the 1% that says ugly things to them.
How do we address family members who seem to be leaning more and more towards the militia movement, trying to keep peace in the family and yet remain firm in our convictions sometimes creates a strained relationship?
If anybody's got a good answer to that one, I need to be talking to you myself. No, I didn't need that facetiously. That is always a concern, and it's a difficult kind of challenge. How do we deal not just with family, but with friends? Two things I would suggest. One is that most often racism and racist ideology and racist theology, etc., does not come from an intellectual conviction at the start. It comes from some other needs, some other concerns, or some other fears. And so if often with people who we're talking to who are starting to head into those kinds of directions or are already there, often we don't need to debate the theology. We don't need to debate the ideology and the philosophy. We aren't going to get very far on that kind of path. What we need to do rather is to look past that and see what the fears and concerns are that person has. What's at the root of it? And start talking and sharing on that level. Because if we can express some support for fears and for concerns and for the anxieties, and if we can start reaching at that level, then there's no need for that person to head off into those kinds of destructive philosophies and theologies. That's particularly true for the young. For some of the young people who greeted you at the back door as you came in or outside. Part of what's so concerning about the young people who are headed into the racist skinhead movement is that they're often there not because they're bigots. They're often there because they feel that they don't have anywhere else to go. They feel that they don't belong. They feel that that no one listens to them. They feel that there's no place for them to fit in. And so they find some structure that justifies their anger and justifies their desire for violence and tells them that they really do belong and that they're part of it, and they jump at that. We've seen that over and over again with young people who have joined the racist supremacy movement, and then gradually they start believing more and more of the rhetoric that comes at them. If you want a more scientific approach to all of that, I'd recommend a book by James Oppo, a professor of sociology at Pocatello. He interviewed over 500 people who were involved in the racist supremacist movement several years ago, and this book is a result of that sociological research. He found out some very interesting things about why people become a part of these groups and the process and the steps that are engaged as they head in that kind of direction. He also found out that as his next step after this book was put out, he started saying, okay, if this is how they got in, how do they get out? And he started looking at that as well. And he found out that people get out of this movement not because they've been debated out, not because they've been argued out, but because they've been loved out. When they found out that somebody could befriend them, or in some cases somebody fell in love with them who didn't share this kind of belief, then they started doubting that belief structure and they were open to some new ideas and open to some better expressions. So love them out, friend them out, works a lot better, it seems, than debate them out. Not that we shouldn't share our ideas.
Do you think the same number of people would have shown up tonight to hear a black or a Jew speak on human rights in North Idaho? You are critical of patriots who believe in constitutional government. You call them racist. Do you feel all public officials, politicians, and military people who have taken an oath to protect and defend the Constitution are racist?
No, I think I was fairly clear about that, that we're talking Constitution and Constitution. What I was very clear about is that the Christian patriot, Christian identity support of a Constitution is support for a Constitution as interpreted by them in its organic state, as they thought that the Founding Fathers had written it. Not the Constitution as it is today, the Constitution that is being upheld by the folks who were elected, as that question proposes, by our elected officials, by our leaders, the Constitution that has been amended over 200 years, and the Constitution that has been interpreted and continues to be interpreted by our courts. That's the Constitution that we believe in today. That's the Constitution that grants equality and justice. The Constitution that the Christian patriots are trying to promote is a Constitution, as they propose it, that sets up two different statuses of citizenship. It sets up a divine right to citizenship for certain groups of people, namely white males, and everybody else has constitutional or amendment citizenship. That distinction in there allows one group to have more rights than the other. It's just set up in that kind of way. So the Constitution as it is today, and the supporters of the Constitution today, no, that Constitution doesn't promote racism, it guarantees freedom. The Constitution as being promoted by Christian patriots, and the fashion that they're promoting it is one that sets up a distinction between citizens on two different levels, and therefore promotes a supremacy and promotes a racism. That's what I'm talking about. And I think if you remember my remarks as well, and I might have slipped somewhere along the line, but I don't think I called all Christian patriots racist. I think I said that some Christian patriot within the Christian patriot movement promote an ideology that is racist, and I tend to try to be very careful about that. I can't tell if some person is a racist just simply by what they might say. Some people will very clearly identify themselves as a racist, and then of course I can say self-identified as a racist, but a racist is somebody who is promoting a system, and if you're a part of a movement, then I have to believe that you promote that movement, but only you know whether you're really a racist or not. But I suggest that you look at the movement that you're promoting and see if that doesn't continue to oppress a whole group of people with less rights than you want to grant to some others.
I was just outside and saw the media attention given to these bigots and no one else's opinion taken. How should I react?
I don't know. I don't want to say it was very angry. I was angry.
Well, I would hope that the media is also talking to some of the other folks that are on the inside, and that they reported on some of the things that were said from up here at the podium, so that it's not just a platform for those who are reading them on the outside. Free speech is free speech, and I very much am in favor of keeping the belief system of the Patriots and the Aryan Nations and the racist skinheads and everybody in those groups, of keeping that into the light of day, because I think it survives less well in the light of day than it does under the cover of darkness. So I don't want that suppressed. And so the media plays a very definite role in this discussion and in what we're doing. On the other hand, I'm certainly not going to say that I applaud everything that the media does with this. Every so often, all that it seems to provide is a platform. And you almost, you'd say, why don't you just charge your fee for what you're getting here with this platform that's being provided? I've seen that happen as well. And so there's been some positives and some negatives. I mean, some of the media coverage is very, very good because it's more thorough and goes into some depth, and it doesn't just simply provide a platform for exposure of ideas. For the exposure of one particular set of ideas, it provides more of a balance there. So I think we just need to continue working with the media. That's my point. Let's keep talking to them, and let's keep working with them to try to get out as balanced a kind of approach as possible so that they really do serve their role of interjecting this all into the public debate. That's what they're about.
When intimidation gets into our backyard, how shall we deal with it?
Well, intimidation is intended to make you change your pattern of behavior. And if you change your pattern of behavior, they succeed, and intimidation succeeds. And so the first thing I think we need to do when intimidation starts moving in is make a decision not to change our patterns of behavior. If we're standing together for justice, we dare not be intimidated to turn away from that. That's one thing, is to make a decision that simply says, I will not be governed by intimidation, I will not be governed by fear, I will not change my patterns of behavior because of fear and intimidation. If we did that, none of us would drive a car. Because there's always the possibility that we're going to be in an accident, and if intimidation and fear changed our actions, we'd all stay out of cars. Because what we do is we take reasonable kinds of precautions. We try to be as safe as we can. We put in some normal kinds of security measures. We get airbags, and we wear our seatbelts, and we drive safely, and we don't drive when we're drinking, and a few things like that. We work at it as safely as we possibly can, and we get in our car and we drive. In the face of intimidation, the same kind of thing, I would suggest. We take some normal kinds of precautions, we do reasonable kinds of things, and then we continue on our way. One point. Second point is stand together. Part of why we're strong tonight is because there's over 500 people here in this room. It is true for me, and I expect it was true for all of you as well, and for you as well, that you came here this evening with just a little bit of anticipation, because we read about it. There's going to be some organized protest out front, and there's been some ugly things that have been happening. So you came here with just a little bit of anticipation, a little bit of concern, and maybe just feeling a little bit of intimidation. But as you walked in here, and as you started seeing the numbers of people here, and you started hearing the music, and you started feeling what was going on here, that intimidation melts away, because we're here together. So one, normal kinds of reasonable precautions, don't let intimidation change what you really believe in. And secondly, let's stand together.
We're going to take just a couple more questions. As a teacher, someone who's taught school for over 20 years, and I consider myself somewhat of a handwriting expert, and have determined that at least 20 of these were written by the same hand. So we're going to try and give other people a chance to ask as well. Does the government now have the constitutional right to limit the kinds of arms, automatic rifles, AK-47, etc., that ordinary citizens may own? The constitutional truth on citizen gun ownership must be published and understood. The Second Amendment Bill of Rights says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. What does it mean? Has the U.S. Supreme Court studied it and published their authoritative definition? What is the meaning of militia in relation to the people's individuals' rights to bear arms? Okay?
See, that'll be about 15 seconds anyway. I'm not an expert on the Second Amendment by any means, but I offer a couple of thoughts. One is it's pretty generally understood these days and accepted by courts and by legal authority that what the Second Amendment, how the Second Amendment is utilized today is in support of National Guard. That it is the National Guard that fulfills that call for militias that is in the Second Amendment. That's one thing. Secondly, the courts have repeatedly said that the Second Amendment is not a guarantee for individual gun ownership. That's not what it says, that's not what it means. Even the NRA, who has some pretty strong feelings on this matter, as you well know, even the NRA has never used the Second Amendment in its court battles over gun control, because they know from the court decisions that have come down through history that the courts will not interpret the Second Amendment in that direction. That is not a courts have not seen the Second Amendment as a guarantee for the control of firearms. That there is some limitation in control of firearms in our society, yes. I don't think anybody debates that there needs to be some kind of limit. Who would say that we should allow individuals to have nuclear arms, for example? I don't think anybody would do that. There's some kinds of limits of armaments in our society, we know that. The question is where? And as our society becomes more complex, and at times when it becomes more violent, it seems to me that it's perfectly reasonable that we're going to want to control some weapons that have no purpose at all in any kind of hunting or any kind of self-defense, but only have the purpose of killing people. That's my own personal opinion. That's not the opinion of the Northwest Coalition. We don't take a stand on gun control issues, but the question was asked, and so I'll answer it as an individual.
I want to share this, and this isn't as much of a question as it is comments that someone handed in. I think they're important. I'm the mother of 2 black kids, 5 Native kids, and 4 white kids. I've lived here for 13 years. Many, many people have shown great love to us. Yes, both sides exist. Please emphasize how important it is for the media to emphasize the positive. The press frightens me more than the Aryan Nations. I don't want to be afraid. We're going to conclude the meeting at this It's a curiosity to me. How many of you were here at the meeting in 1991 when Bill Wassmuth spoke? Raise your hands. That was the meeting that gave impetus to the idea of forming the task force. It was a meeting that I attended as having moved to Sandpoint fairly recently, sat up in the balcony, and I was proud to live in this area when I saw the standing ovation that was given to Bill Wassmuth. I hope that tonight will be another milestone in our march toward changing the face of North Idaho. There will be events that go on. We'll keep you informed. Thank you for all of you that handed in your cards. We'll be in touch with you. I wanted to close with one quotation from Albert Einstein, one of my favorite people. The world is too dangerous to live in, not because of the people who do evil, but because of the people who sit and let it happen. Thank you so much.
saw truth and the ways they have conducted themselves for thousands of years were all around kin and family. And that predates royal families. It wasn't
But if
just
you take that too far, then you
the
get
royal
inbreeding.
families. The royal families.
that's true. We have that problem.
Then, you know, I mean,
Well, when you have all the Scandinavian countries and all the people that live there, you don't so much have to preserve your family as just your family, but I mean your heritage. Nowadays we see heritage and culture dying off everywhere. We see no family values anywhere. We see the rise of crime, the rise of drugs.
that's a problem.
This is total ludicrousy.
I think the
to
Indians
think
are
that
counting on it to
America,
become an Indian homeland again.
oh, well, that could be too. But I don't think that'll happen any more than it'll become a white homeland. To tell you the truth, to be honest, to think that this is going to become a white homeland is totally ludicrous. What we're saying as a people, as a movement, as a people, and this area is predominantly white, and a lot of people are coming here because they want this area to stay predominantly white for just a little while, at least a little while longer. And the reason why is because a lot of people that are coming here are coming from Chicago, from Denver, from Phoenix, from Los Angeles, from California, a great amount of people that have experienced diversity, and they are somewhat not disenfranchised with this diversity, and they don't think it's our strength because of the situations that they got there, reverse discrimination, affirmative action programs, crime, and so forth, but they've come here to escape.
I see it as a lack here that we don't have the diversity. It's a loss for me. I've lived on the East Coast for a long time, and the fact that I don't have any Hispanic friends, there are very few Jewish people, that I don't know that
Well,
many black people.
If you want that type of diversity, you should go to where
Germany.
those areas are. Go to Germany now. That's right there in Germany. If you fly into Frankfurt today, you'd be very surprised. You wouldn't see any white Germans there, hardly
And I
at all.
want other people
Maybe
to
a
be
few,
able
a
to live
handful.
here, too. I want my
But where do
friends
we
who are
go?
Jewish.
Where do
You
we
can stay
go?
here. I'm not saying that you have to
Where
go.
do we go?
Well, yeah, why do you feel like you have to go somewhere?
Where do we
Indians
go?
have a better
Where do we
chance
go? We want a place under the
of
sun
having
for
their own
our
land.
people,
At least
where we
they
can
have
our
some
own
land
homeland.
set
Where do
aside
we
for
go?
them.
Don't you have
Sorta,
your own
yeah.
home here?
No.
Yeah,
aren't you
white
friends
people
who
don't.
used to
It
be
doesn't
close?
look out after our own interest.
But
When you
Indians
talk,
do.
when you
Sorta.
see the TV and
The
so
Fed's
forth,
pulling the
and they
strings
talk
on
about white culture, and even in the schools now, when they talk about white culture, they're always talking about what white people
I got
did
a long
to
ride to go
what
home.
white people, what Germans
But
did
it's-
to
Have a good night.
What people, but
That's what
see,
we did.
after you bombard the youth with all this guilt for so long, what we're saying is they have to be able to be free of all that past guilt. They have no control over what happened in the past.
I agree
They have
they
to
have to
be
be
able, they have to
free
be
of the
able to
guilt,
feel good about
but not free of
themselves.
the facts. Those are
Be
facts.
free. They have
You
to
don't
feel
have
good
to
about
feel
themselves ourselves as a youth. See what I'm saying? And today in this society, it's okay if blacks get up and say, hey, I'm proud of my heritage and culture, and that's looked upon great, and that's great. And if Jewish people say, oh, we have such a rich culture, that's great. They can put it in magazines and so forth. But if you say the white Aryan people or the white Western culture have a great history and culture and so forth, oh my gosh, that's racism.
But that's not what you said. You just said that you needed a home for yourself.
Well, see, if we had our own nation, then we can have our own history to where we could say,
do you realize that's what Israel said?
And that's what they're doing in Israel. And you know what, if you and I went into Israel, if we went into Israel and we basically started trying to convert people from Judaism to Christianity, well, that's a 5-year prison sentence in Israel. 5-year prison sentence. You take a little New Testament and you try to convert people from...
I don't want you to form a homeland in the U.S. because I want the U.S. to be a place for anybody.
Israel's a very racial state. Very racial state. Very racial state. And
So we need to keep it on a positive.
John's been doing that just from the beginning. He's always doing it. Nobody can see
They turn around and mark 200%. So, I mean, obviously, it's a money-making machine.
John and I have totally disagreed privately and publicly, and yet he's been a good neighbor. He's helped me out when I had someone that I wanted him checked on because I'm a nurse. I asked John to go check on him.
Phil has a place.
Hey, Judge,
You want to see the back?
Yeah.
But it says right.
I'm so delighted with the turnout tonight. I think it really speaks well for Sandpoint, and I'm excited for what it means on the road ahead for the task force. We really do need to change the face of North Idaho, and I think we're on our way.